What's up, Fiveable? Hey everyone, thank you for joining with me tonight, wherever you are. Thank you guys for joining me. My name is Allie Thiessen here with Fiveable. We are going to be doing a live review about Transoceanic Interconnections, which sounds frankly kind of ridiculous. I showed my husband my slides mostly because I was very proud of my Bitmoji. If you can see, it's paddling through the Fiveable. I thought it looked so cute. So I showed my husband, who's a scientist, and he looked at the title and said, wow, he's a scientist. He said, those words are big even for me. Transoceanic interconnections. What the heck does that mean? What are we going to be talking about today? That is actually the title I did not come up with on my own. That is a title from the AP College Board. They came up with that very grandiose title. So don't blame me if you're like, what am I watching? But all this review is going to be an overview of Unit 4. So thank you guys for joining me. Let me know in comments where you are joining us from. I am joining you today from Germany. And I also have a poll that I want you to go vote on. It is asking if your class has covered this Unit 4, Transoceanic Interconnections yet. That'll just give me a good idea of where you're at in class and if this is going to be like a preview or a review for you guys. So feel free to participate and answer in that poll. As we go through the live review, if you have questions, please let me know in comments, and I hope to get answered all of those questions that you guys have. And this will be kind of hard and fast. We're going through the entire unit in about an hour. That's about how much time we're going to do, but make sure you stick around to the end because we have some practice questions, and we have a fabulous practice short answer question from the one, the only Mr. Eric Beckman. So make sure you stick around to the end for those practice questions. And again, sound off in comments. Let me know where you're from, and then make sure you vote in that poll. Also, here at Fiveable, we have some amazing live streams coming up. We have so much going on here with the AP World History team at Fiveable. We have a ton of great live streams in the next couple weeks. We have some that are coming up tomorrow. One at 5 p.m. Eastern time on the Columbian Exchange, which is part of this Unit 4. We also have another one about Islamic gunpowder empires, which is in Unit 3, but the same time period. A skills-based one, mastering the DBQ, Unit 3 review. So we're kind of previewing Unit 4 and reviewing Unit 3 at the same time. And then another more of a skills-based about analyzing early modern sources. And then again, we have a ton coming up next week as well. Totally fine if you guys are still on Unit 2, as I see, Allie, you're saying in comments. Everybody is everywhere. And I'm saying that not to over-exaggerate. Teachers from all around the world who teach AP World History Modern are literally all across the board on where they are in their classes. It depends on the pacing of your class, and it depends on when you started your class. Some classes that started after Labor Day in September are obviously going to be a little bit later than classes that started in August, early August. And then just pacing. Some teachers are doing kind of a preview unit of period 0, the information before 1200 that was cut from the AP World History class for this new modern course. And then there are some teachers that are already in Unit 4. And then there are some classes that aren't even using the units, which is absolutely fine too. And so if you guys don't even know what the unit refers to, that's fine. The time period we're in is 1450 to 1750. So if you guys are using the old periodization for how we used to do the class, if your teachers are still using that, absolutely fine. It's the kind of the early modern era that we're in here, 1450 to 1750. If you're still in those previous units, please still stick around because some of this information is going to connect to the other earlier time period. So don't worry where you're at. This is going to be a good preview of wherever that you're at in your class. Let's talk about what's going on in the stream. So I'm going to talk about how this unit is set up. I don't know if you guys can see behind me. I'm in my home office right now. I actually posted, the AP College Board sent all the AP World History teachers this geeky poster of all of the units of the new class, and I have it hanging up in my wall in my apartment because it's amazing to just look at. So we're here, and if we were kind of on pace here, Unit 4, we're like almost halfway through the class if we were on my pacing, how we're doing it. But don't worry if you're not there. Shut up, Siri. Don't worry if you're not there almost halfway through. That's crazy. Don't worry about it. Because some of you guys are only a month into school. So chill, we got this. So we'll talk about that Unit 4 at a glance. We'll go over some of the major topics, which is another kind of new word that we're having here for the AP World History Modern class. And then we're going to talk about some continuities and changes. That means things that stay the same and things that change over the time period. And then going over some practice questions, which again, stick to the end. You're going to want to see those and participate in those. So what does Unit 4 look like? Unit 4 is huge. If you don't understand where those units are, again, this is 1450 to 1750. We have 2 units in that time period. Unit 3 is called land-based empires. And then Unit 4, the one I'm going to go over today, is called Transoceanic Interconnections. And part of this unit, what they do is they subdivide the topics into, for this unit, there's 8 subtopics. And they do this, I kind of don't like it, but it kind of helps organize so we can kind of teach the different themes. But really some of it is kind of repetitive. So these are the first 4. You can kind of see the repetitiveness here. 4.1 is technological innovations. That's an important one because that's a new theme this year that they added. So it's not just social, political, economic. We also have technology as a theme. So Unit 4.1 is going to be about that theme specifically. 4.2, exploration, causes and events. We have Columbian Exchange, maritime empires established, maritime empires maintained and developed, internal and external challenges to state power, changing social hierarchies, and then continuity and change. And so if your teachers aren't using these themes, just ignore them. But it's going to help me kind of help you as we go through this preview, just so that I make sure I hit everything. The importance of me kind of going through these using those phrasing is because I think it'll help you study. If you go back and review this video, you know, I don't want to say in May because I will be cutting it really close to the AP test, but in April, because you're going to jumpstart on your studying, you're going to want to use these as kinds of benchmarks for your studying. So things that you know really, really well, you don't want to have to focus on too much. Hope that makes sense. Let's get into some content. Again, if you're not here in the class, this is going to be like a preview for you. And then we have these upcoming live reviews the next couple weeks that are going to dive into these topics more specifically. So make sure you tune in for future live reviews here at Fiveable. So let's start with 4.1, technological innovations. Was anybody watching? Was it my last live review, or maybe it was 2 times before? I did a live review from the previous time period on, it was on technologies in sailing. Anybody watch that? I think it was a couple weeks ago. I talked about 1200 to 1450. Some of these technologies that existed before 1450. So if you tuned in, you'll know that we've already been seeing the technological innovations for transoceanic travel earlier, before this time period of 1450. And so these kinds of technologies and these tools were used over really great distances. The Polynesians were incredible long distance sailors. And across the Indian Ocean before 1450, we had a ton of interconnection already before 1450 in the Indian Ocean, connecting East Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia. So we already had that transoceanic interconnection because of technologies. And so the previous technologies that we had before 1450 are still going to be used after 1450. Some of them are going to change slightly. Some of them are going to be improved upon. As we get further into our time period, we just keep getting better with our technological innovations and advancements. But they're all kind of the basics of previous technologies that we had for overseas trade. So how did we get these into the 1450s, into the time period where we see more of this transoceanic interconnections? This technology is going to spread from east to west. We're seeing this technology coming from the Indian Ocean, technologies that were used in the Indian Ocean region, things like sailing, navigational tools, as well as ship design. Those things are also going to be spread and adopted in the West. Previously using things like lateen sails, those triangular sails that were so popular in the Indian Ocean, compasses, which have been around now for a very long time, astronomy, as well as the knowledge of the stars. That technology and that knowledge is going to spread from east to west. And that's kind of something we're going to continue to see in this time period, even across land-based empires. Like when you get into the gunpowder empires, we see that technology go from east to west. And as we adapt to these new technologies, we can improve upon them. We can take the lateen sails that were so useful in the Indian Ocean, and we can add triangular sails to those with these caravels. We can improve upon these star charts with new astrolabes for plotting our location while we're at the open seas at night. All of these things are just going to continue to be improved upon. That picture that I have here is a caravel. We also have the Dutch flights, I think is how it's pronounced, flights, which actually made up a predominant amount of overseas trade. The majority of overseas trade conducted with these flights. And we also have an improvement of our understanding of trade winds and currents. Guess where we saw this previously? If you know in comments, where before 1450 did we use knowledge of trade winds and currents for trade? Answer in comments if you know. Where before 1450 did we already know and use the knowledge of the trade winds and currents? The Indian Ocean, those monsoon winds that are going to carry ships, great, from the one side of the Indian Ocean to the other, kind of allowing for ease of trade between those two areas, kind of making like a seasons of trade. Well, that's also going to be improved upon as we go into other areas of the world, into the Atlantic and into the Pacific Ocean, understanding these gyres, and what's called the volta do mar, which is basically like the movement of the ocean. Understanding these trade winds and these currents are going to be just like how they used it in the Indian Ocean with those monsoon winds. They're going to be able to propel those ships there and back again. And so can we see how all of these are going to be kind of combined into a perfect time, 1450 to 1750, of exploration of these Western European sailors making contacts with areas that they had previously not had contacts with, and that are already kind of being used in other areas of the world, moving again from east to west. So 4.1 goes with 4.2 very closely, because 4.1 is about technology, but when we're talking about exploration causes and events, well, what's going to be a cause? Better technology. And even using the term kind of exploration is pretty Eurocentric as well, like that there's places out there waiting for Europeans to just show up and discover them, which people had already been living in. But we have to remember that these contacts are going to be on a new scale, and they're going to dramatically alter world history because of the scope and scale of these contacts between people that had not had direct contact previously. So again, one of the causes, obviously, of exploration are those navigational tools. They're going to better increase those connections between Europe, Africa, Asia, and then eventually to the Americas. Another important cause is state-supported maritime exploration. What does that mean? It means that the government is going to start funding these sailors to send them out to other areas, to start making connections for trade. Places like Portugal and Spain are going to use government funding, and they're going to hire out navigators to go out into these areas to stake claims and to start opening up sources of trade for their country, kind of benefiting again that home country because of that direct access to trade. The Portuguese are going to kind of lead the way in this state-supported maritime exploration here along the west coast of Africa, and kind of beginning that jumpstart of other countries that are also going to follow suit. The Spanish are going to come to West Africa. The Dutch, the French, the British are all going to follow suit. And then again, the Spanish, we know, across the Atlantic. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella sponsoring that voyage of exploration across the Atlantic of Christopher Columbus. But we also see it with the English, French, and the Dutch. Now, this isn't really addressed in Unit 4, this unit here. It's kind of touched on in Unit 3 on land-based empires. But one thing I just want to point out is that by 1450 to 1750, we're starting to see more distinctive, centralized empires in Europe. And that's not something we previously had. In the early modern time period, 1200 to 1450, we had a lot of decentralized states. We had feudal lords, and we didn't really have this centralized empire of, one king ruling over a vast territory where people are acknowledging that leader and buying into it. We really start seeing that in this time period, 1450 to 1750. Then using that money, using that power, and then extending it overseas, making contacts for overseas trade, as well as later colonization. Now, this, of course, is going to lead to an effect of exploration with the Columbian Exchange. It's kind of thrown in here in this part. Let me kind of explain how we're getting here. So 1450 to 1750, we have these technologies that have already existed. They're now moved to the West. We've adapted to these technologies. We've improved upon them. We have greater understanding with astronomy and map making, with cartography, and we have improved these technologies to go greater distances. And now we're making contact. And that contact is where we're going to start to see a lot of these major effects. And so part of this contact is, of course, with that state-sponsored sea voyages, we're going to see that contact between two areas of the world that had not previously had contact before. And that is what we sometimes refer to, history books still refer to as the old world and the new world. And it's very strange because, of course, people had been in the Americas setting up states and empires of their own. But we have the kind of new hemispheric interactions that had not previously existed, emerging into what is called the Columbian Exchange. Now I'm going to make you feel real smart. In comments, who is the Columbian Exchange named for? This is an easy one. Make you feel real smart. Who's the Columbian Exchange named for? I'll give you a big clue. It's in the title. So what is an exchange? Exchange does not always equate to trade. This exchange is kind of more of a back and forth freestyle exchange between the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere. This exchange includes things like plants, animals, people, diseases, but it's not trade exactly. And that's where I know my students get really confused when we're talking about like triangular trade to Columbian Exchange, that kind of mix those up. When you think about this exchange, think about it as more of like a movement, kind of more of like this freestyle movement between East and West. You wouldn't say, hey, I'll give you influenza if you give me syphilis. Good trade. It's this back and forth exchange. Some of these have unintended consequences. And if you didn't know, the answer was Christopher Columbus. Why is he named for this? Because he is going to make the voyage to the Americas and then back again. And he brings things with him, thus the exchange. And of course, this is going to have long-lasting demographic consequences. What is demographic? If you have not heard that word before, demography is all about people. And a lot of times we kind of use it interchangeably with like population. And we're going to have huge, long-lasting impacts on populations with this Columbian Exchange. Make sure you tune in tomorrow to that live review on the Columbian Exchange specifically. But know that we, of course, are going to have these long-lasting consequences to populations. Devastating diseases in the Americas like smallpox, measles, and they had previously not had this overseas contact to Afro-Eurasia, so they had no built-up immunity to those diseases. And so it devastates those populations even more. Warfare also devastates those populations. Later, slavery in the Americas devastates those populations. But on the flip side, new foods in particular coming from the Americas are going to have a dramatic impact on population increase in Afro-Eurasia. New American foods that are very dense in calories, things like potatoes, which are also very vitamin rich, increase the population. So we kind of have this almost demographic flip-flop effect where we see devastating impacts on populations, leading to population decline of Native Americans in the Americas, while in Afro-Eurasia populations are going to increase. Also with this Columbian Exchange, the introduction of new plants also is going to impact the creation of cash crops. A cash crop, very simply, is a crop that you wouldn't really eat in its native state. It's produced for the goal of selling it for a profit. Things like cotton. I wouldn't suggest you go eat cotton, but these things are used for a profit first and foremost. Also new domesticated animals, both ways, into the Americas as well as into Afro-Eurasia. I always bring up the example of horses. Horses are not native to the Americas. If you've ever seen like an old Western movie, you always see kind of this imagery of Native Americans on horseback hunting. And a lot of people just think they must have already been here in the Americas, but they weren't. They were brought over from the Spanish, were the first contacts with these horses. And then this visual kind of gives you that visual cue about the Columbian Exchange, kind of this back and forth exchange. People, ideas, even languages, religions are coupled with this Columbian Exchange as well. Foods, of course, animals, diseases, etc. Now let's go into these maritime empires. When we're talking about maritime empires, this is the opposite of land-based empires. Land-based empires are on land, while maritime empires are on sea. But these aren't like islands, really. I mean, some of them are islands, but we're more talking about trading ports. And what a port is, you can see this picture here of this port. This is a port in Mombasa, which is modern-day Kenya. You can see this armed trading post. And these were what Europeans were creating as they made contact to these areas, starting with West Africa and then into South Asia, Southeast Asia, etc. I always kind of make a distinction here for this time period to the next one, 1750 to 1900s, because in Africa at this point, the contact with the Europeans is really going to be almost solely by these trading posts along the coastline. It's not really until we get to the 1750s to 1900, that next time period, where we see, the mass colonization of Africa by Europeans. We see the mass colonization in this time period really almost solely in the Americas, a little bit scattered, Southeast Asia, a little bit scattered in South Africa as well. But most of this in this time period, we have trading post empires. And what that means is a connection of European ports where they have direct access to that trade. And what the Europeans are hoping to get from this is they want to cut out the middlemen. They want to get that money, get those trade goods directly. And they're going to rely a lot of times on already existing networks of trade that are going to now come to the buyer, come to the port for the European goods. And then those European goods are going to be shuttled back to Europe. But as they make contact with already existing empires, there's going to be effects on those already existing empires. Places in East Africa, like the Ming Dynasty, late Ming Dynasty, and then the Qing Dynasty that follows, are going to set restrictions on European trade. Like you could only trade during the trade season, you had to only trade at certain ports, etc. Whereas the Tokugawa shogunate of Japan is going to have even more restrictions on European trade. So that's one effect that already existing empires have on this newly emerging contact with maritime empires. It also has an effect on African states. And we see this kind of fluctuation of growth and decline of African states. And a lot of that has to do with their trade relations with Europe. Those states that do welcome trade with Europe in order to gain access to these European goods are going to see the increase in their power because they're going to get European weapons, they have European backing, and they're going to see their power increase. While as some African states that try to resist, examples there of the growth of those states, while some African states either actively resist or they see the devastating population impacts on their states because of slave raids for the transatlantic slave trade practices, that's going to lead to a decline of those African states. But in the Indian Ocean, we generally see a lot of continuity of the existing trade. What was really unique about the Indian Ocean trade before 1450 is that it was really independent, and that we had a great diversity of traders, and that diversity is going to continue 1450 to 1750. Now we have newly arriving Europeans, but we also still have Swahili Arabs, we have Omanis, we have Javanese from Southeast Asia, and we already have this diversity that exists in the Indian Ocean that's going to continue, especially with the diversity of merchants and the diversity of goods that are traded across the vast Indian Ocean. And then again, we're going to see the establishment of colonies. Once again, keep in mind that most of this colonization is just going to take place in the Americas at this time. Let me show you guys a map here that better explains this. Can you guys see the key on this map? It's kind of small there in the corner. But if you look at the colors there, we see the British colonies. Those are British claims to land in that kind of orangish color. But you also see the arrows. Those are those trade routes. So those are kind of coupled with there. You can see the trade flow, European Baltic trade, European Mediterranean trade. And then we can see on here these trade goods. You can't really see because it's really tiny, but those little tiny words on the map are the trade goods that are going back and forth from these areas. So as you guys can see in this map, these maritime empires, we have these trading posts, those dots that you can see along the coast like of Africa here. And look at India, South Asia. Do you see all of these dots? Those are those trading posts. And that's what we're really establishing across Afro-Eurasia are those trading post empires, with some colonization that you guys can see pictured there, like the Philippines under Spanish control, the Dutch control of Indonesia. But then look at the Americas. The Americas, we're not seeing really trading post empires. We're seeing more mass colonization, land claiming in those areas, because we're going to see the development of things like plantation economies that demand more land. But remember, we already had the existing trade networks. We already had trade going on in the Indian Ocean. We already had trade going on in Southeast Asia to East Asia. We already had these existing trade networks. Now we're just seeing the arrival of Europeans in those areas of already existing trade of Afro-Eurasia, whereas the Americas are a new frontier of trade at this time period. So maritime empires established, a little bit more about the impacts of that. Again, we're going to see impacts not just on the government side, but also with the economy. These economic impacts, now that we're seeing trade, we're seeing cash crops, we're seeing countries wanting to cash in on the lands. They want to get as much wealth as possible from these new territories. In particular, in the Americas, we see the development of plantation economies. And those plantations require lots of land, but they also require lots of labor. And so this hard labor is going to be in demand in the Americas because of the plantation economies. So we need sources of labor. Some of the time we're going to see continuity of already existing sources of labor, like with the Inca Mita system. But we're going to see continuity of other existing labor systems of slaves in the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean, more of like household slaves. But new labor systems are going to be developed in the Americas, like chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is more like property slavery, as well as indentured servitude, the encomienda, and later the hacienda systems. With this new system of plantation economies, Europeans adapt to it in ways that increases their bottom line. They want to make profit from these colonies, and in order to maximize their profit, they're going to try to have as cheap of labor sources as possible. And so it's going to lead directly to that importation of slaves from Africa into what we call the transatlantic slave trade. I don't really see the difference between 4.4 and 4.5. They're still about maritime empires. Now they're maintained and developed rather than established. Kind of use those words interchangeably. But again, coupled with this new economic system, we have mercantilism. That's kind of a key word that you're going to see crop up in this time period when we're talking about long distance trade and transoceanic interconnections. Mercantilism is really about increasing countries' bottom line. Part of mercantilist policies is that you want to make sure you export as a country more than you import. You want to make more money than you want to spend money. That's kind of something important to remember as you guys are probably getting your first jobs and stuff. Don't spend more than you make. Anywho, we also see new economic systems that couple with these policies: joint stock companies, monopolies, more like state-sponsored monopolies, like countries that are monopolizing one particular type of trade, like the Dutch in Indonesia for like nutmeg. We also are going to see an influx of silver, which is also a really important thing to note, because the silver in the economy disrupts those already existing economic practices of previous empires and previous trade systems that did not use silver that was mined in the Americas coming from these new colonial mines. But we also have increased competition between Europeans, as well as competition in these countries to interact with trade from Europeans, because that's where really the money was coming from. We see this increased rivalry in the Indian Ocean. We see it also in Africa. But we do see some continuity of already existing labor systems, like I mentioned before, but also kind of domestic labor. And what we mean by that is labor methods that were already used for particular goods. Cotton in India and silk in China were always in demand. Think back to the Silk Roads. I mean, we talked about that in a previous time period, and then it existed even before in the time period that was cut from AP World History Modern. But silk has always been in demand in China, but now it's slightly different because we have an increased demand because we have the arrival of Europeans in China, and we have easier access for kind of the everyday wealthy to get things like silk from China. And so we have an increased demand even more. Now, this map does a good job kind of explaining that competition for trade in the Indian Ocean between the Ottomans, and here demonstrates the Portuguese. Remember, in the Indian Ocean, I said before, we have kind of a continuity of previous merchants, and now we see just the arrival of the Portuguese and later the arrival of the Spanish, the Dutch, the British, the French, and this is kind of going to throw off this balance of power that we had previously in the Indian Ocean, where really no one kind of dominated those trade routes. And so as Europeans are arriving in these areas, they're claiming possessions, they're creating forts. And of course, they're going to come into contact with already existing empires like the Ottomans. And they're going to come into contact with already existing empires, and that creates tensions between those. And then this map does a great job kind of showing really our two centers of trade that we're starting to see in this time period. We have the new zone of trade across the Atlantic, and this was all new in this time period, totally new, because we had not had this long-lasting interconnection between East and West across the Atlantic previously. We had bits and spurts of contact, but not this long-lasting, long-distance trade contact. And so we have this new zone of trade across the Atlantic where everybody kind of focuses on. But I just want to point out as well, we have this already existing system of trade going on in Asia that's going to continue now with just the arrival of these Europeans kind of trying to stake their claim and gaining access to the trade goods that are already existing. And a lot of the manufacturing centers is still really going to be in Asia because it already had been in Asia. Does that make a little bit of sense? So we have new, and that's going to be really dominated by Europeans because they're the ones kind of staking claim in the Atlantic, where we already have manufacturing centers in Asia that the Europeans are trying to break into. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. And we have a lot of the maps that look like this. Makes it really confusing because we forget about the connection that's going across the Pacific as well. So we also have this connection that's going across the Pacific between the Philippines and the Americas. And this is really dominated by the Spanish. And this is the route, a picture here from Urdaneta, who really proved. Remember, we talked in that first part about technology and gyres and currents. You can see them actually pictured here, these ocean gyres that are going to kind of bring trade there and back. And Urdaneta really proved that across the Pacific. And across this Pacific route, we're going to see the real influx of what are known as Manila galleons, and this Spanish silver that we're going to see arrive from the where it's mined in the Americas to the Philippines, and really driving that trade that's also across the Pacific. I linked, and back where you guys joined in, I linked a article that's called The Cruel Ships of Prosperity, that's about Urdaneta and about the Manila galleons, which is a very, very interesting read. So make sure you go back and check it out. Like we said before, demographic changes are taking place because of the Columbian Exchange, but it's also because of these maritime empires. Like I said before, the new colonies in the Americas demand labor, and that labor is going to come from originally early on coming from the Native Americans, but as the population declines and is decimated, they're going to look to the continent of Africa, where there had already been existing systems of slave trade, but now it's going to be on a huge scope and scale never seen before. And the population is going to dramatically be altered forever, essentially, in Africa, because a lot of the labor is very hard labor. It's very labor intensive on these plantations. So a lot of the raids and the slave raids are going to be targeting young, able-bodied men who are going to be sent across the Atlantic to these new plantation economies in the Americas. That has a dramatic effect back in Africa because of the loss of that young, able-bodied men population. It's going to throw off that gender balance and have to lead to some family restructuring and social restructuring in Africa. But with this movement of people kind of coupled with that Columbian Exchange, we also have spread of ideas, spread of religion, arrival of new religions like Christianity to the Americas or to sub-Saharan Africa. And in some cases, we see this cultural blending or cultural synthesis. And then, of course, with religions and the spread of religion, but also creating this kind of blended religion where people continue to practice some local customs, but also are converting to these foreign religions like Christianity. All right, like I said before, as these Europeans are trying to break in to already existing trade networks, they're going to have impacts and challenges from those already existing states. And this is going to lead to conflict. And so we have resistance by various groups to these new colonies and to these new trading posts and to these new practices. A lot of local resistance efforts against the changes, against the slave trade, against the enforced labor practices. And so we do see localized resistance efforts against these foreign powers, slave resistance, creation of maroon societies in the Caribbean and Brazil. Remember that later when we get to the Haitian Revolution. North America, we see slave resistance as well. And so we start to see this kind of resistance to these changes, to the economic changes, to the political changes, to the social changes. And there is this resistance by various groups, by states, and by kind of localized groups. And like I said before, we do see a lot of social changes. As we see the arrival of new people into the already existing systems of trade and politics, we have growing diversity. Well, when we have new diversity, we have to deal with that diversity, and how some countries deal with that diversity is to suppress it and trying to maintain that centralized power, maintaining, unity in their empire by trying to eradicate portions of the population or suppress portions of the populations. We also see increasing diversity coupling with new social hierarchies, new social classes that emerge, like the casta system in the Americas, which is actually pictured here in this what's called a castas painting in the Americas. A new mixing of cultures and mixing of peoples, that kind of throws off already existing social hierarchies, and they have to adjust to that of who's going to be at the top. It's going to challenge who was there previously, previous elites that want to maintain and hold on to their power. But times they are changing. We have trade that is not reliant on, European nobles or land-based nobility. We have new money coming in because of mercantilism that's going to impact a growing middle class, and that throws off social systems, and it does lead to resistance as well. Ooh, and there's going to be a review. Donald, who's watching here, is going to be doing this topic, if I'm knowing that correctly. And then the last one coupled into this unit is continuity and change. So let's get to some discussion. If you're here in comments, let's see you participate. You made it almost to the end. Now we're to the discussion and practice questions. So in this time period, Talking about continuities and changes, continuities, remember, are things that stay the same, and then changes are things that change from one thing to another within this time period. We can make connections with continuities of the previous time period. Like I said before, with technologies. In 1200 to 1450, we already had transoceanic voyaging. We already had these technologies. Now in 1450, they're changing, they're improving upon them, and they are having greater effects because of the greater distance. So if we're looking just at 1450 to 1750, what about each of these topics changed or stayed the same? So transoceanic voyaging, what about this changed or stayed the same? If you are here in comments, I don't have a ton of people here, but if you're here, let's hear from you. What about transoceanic voyaging, going across oceans in boats, changed or stayed the same in 1450 to 1750? Now think about it this way. We have new transoceanic interconnections. That means new contacts of new people. So we have new overseas, yes, greater distances, new contacts over those greater distances across the Atlantic, across the world, across the Pacific. Understanding those gyres helped. And then we have the technologies that couple with that. And this is going to lead to greater distances. And that's kind of coupled with this impact of technology. Yeah, astronomy, being able to understand where you are, and then being able to chart your course. Better map making is going to lead to later explorers coming in. And kind of some changes that we see is almost like an expansion in the scope of where they're going. Starting off the coast of the Atlantic by the Portuguese, making contact on the west coast of Africa, and then the south coast of Africa, crossing the Cape of Good Hope, arriving into the Indian Ocean, and then, of course, going across the Atlantic, through the Americas, and then all the way, Magellan credited with the circumnavigation of the globe, and later into the Pacific Islands, connecting to Australia, New Zealand, etc. All of those is just going to be kind of a scale, growth. Now, what about changes or continuities in labor systems? I kind of just talked about this. So what about labor systems changed or stayed the same? Answer in comments. What about labor systems changed or stayed the same? Easy one everybody kind of thinks of right away is a change to labor system, is a new styles of labor. And one that I pointed out before was chattel slavery, transatlantic slave trade. That's a new labor system introduced 1450 to 1750. But as we pointed out before, we have already existing labor systems that are going to continue, like something from China, perhaps. Silk. And so we have this kind of artisan laborers, peasant laborers that continue in some areas where we see new labor systems like chattel slavery in the Americas. I'm going to go a little bit faster so that we can get to the practice questions. Social hierarchies I just talked about in the last slide. Again, new diversity with social hierarchies. We're going to have new social hierarchies. We're going to have new elites. We're going to have new social classes. Any other changes or continuities in social hierarchies that you can think of? Add to comments. Social hierarchies. And then growth of empires. Again, it's kind of confusing at this time period. Think about the Americas. What's new about the growth of empires there? What is new about the growth of empires in Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia? Kind of see two different things here, because in the Americas, we see colonies. Whereas in Afro-Eurasia, we see mostly those trading post empires. But we can also look at some of the changes that are taking place because of the contact with these new maritime empires. Good. Yeah. Thanks, Donald. Yeah. Redefines ethnicity. That is huge with these social hierarchies. And even with the kind of growth of these empires, these are foreign empires ruling over other people, and they're going to have to kind of incorporate those people into their empire in some way or suppress them in some way, and deal with these new people in their empires. But also think about continuities. What empires stayed the same in this time period? We had empires. If you already tuned into Unit 3, we'll have a review coming up in a couple days about land-based empires. Well, how do those react to the new maritime empires? All right, let's get to our practice questions. Thank you guys so much for participating in our discussion. Let's go on to practice questions. You ready? Yes. Multiple choice. We have a couple multiple choice questions. Here is the first one. It is an excerpt from Antonio Vasquez de Espinosa, Spanish priest, Compendium and Description of the West Indies, 1620s. Here's what he says. So huge is the wealth that has been taken out of Potosi silver mine since 1545, when it was discovered, up to the present year of 1628, that 326 million silver coins have been taken out. This does not count the great amount of silver taken secretly from these mines to Spain, paying no 20% tax or registry fee, and to other countries outside Spain, including the Philippines and China. What problem does the document refer to? Answer in comments. Is it A, abuse of Native American labor? B, silver was causing inflation? C, Spanish clergy profited significantly from the silver trade? Or D, theft and smuggling of silver? Answer in comments, A, B, C, or D. This is a tricky one, because some of these were obviously problems that existed in this time period. But what problem does the document refer to? Answer in comments. The answer is D. A is a problem, B is a problem, but which one is it specifically addressing in this one? D. Way to go, Allie. Woot, woot. I'm an Allie too. Okay, number 2. Here we have a blurry, lovely map. And this, if you can't see, these are trade routes with these lines here. You can see they say sugar, rice, cassava, manioc, cocoa, malaria, yellow fever, maize, potatoes, tobacco, etc. In addition to the exchange of plants and animals as shown by the data in the map above, what was a consequence of the biological exchange? You're going to have to know what biological means. You know biology. I say biology. Is it A, biological exchanges had an adverse effect on the indigenous population in the Americas? B, biological exchanges had equal impact in population demographics in the Americas and Europe? C, biological exchanges had an adverse effect on the global population? Or D, biological exchange was limited in cultural interaction in early Mesoamerica? Is it A, B, C, or D? Answer in comments for number 2. Ooh, you guys were fast on that one. The answer for number 2 is A. Good job. Remember I said before we kind of have this flip-flop effect where we have decline in populations in the Americas because of diseases and labor practices, but then we have an increase of population because of those new foods in Afro-Eurasia, which are very calorie dense. All right, now for the time you've been waiting for, we have an original short answer prompt from the one, the only Eric Beckman. It's a little long, so I put the questions on the next slide. So here we go. This is a Portuguese report from East Africa, early 1500s. This source was titled Copy of a Letter of the King of Portugal sent to the King of Castile concerning the voyage and success in India, when it appeared in Rome in 1505, although the title is not necessarily accurate. The passage below describes 13 ships under the command of Pedro Alves Cabral during the second ever Portuguese voyage to India in 1500. So here is our actual source. I'll read it for you. Sailing by the coast, they passed Sofala, Indian Ocean city in southern Africa, present-day Mozambique. This is an island at the mouth of the river and is inhabited by many merchants. Their gold is abundant and is brought to them from the interior of Africa by men small in body, strong and very ugly, and with small voices. This is the same manner which gold is brought to our mine in Guinea. This island too belongs to the king of Kilwa. Past this island, they found 2 ships were held by our captain, but once he understood that they belonged to the aforesaid king, he let them go free, taking from them only a pilot to guide them to Kilwa. Arriving in Kilwa, principal city of this great and well-populated kingdom with safe conduct, the captain was much honored by the king because he was carrying our letters written in Arabic and our directives to the king to grant him traffic and trade off this island. Ooh, thank you, Donald. That is something I did not know. Donald just said in comments, short answer question will be graded if you submit a response on the Schoology account. We'll go over the scoring in about a week. We encourage you to take advantage of this free service. That is amazing. So you can take your time on this too. I'm just going to go through the questions with you guys, kind of address some of the parts of the prompt, and then you guys can practice this and submit your response for it to be graded. And the best part about that is that it doesn't impact your school grade. And yeah, Donald says an easy way is to snapshot the prompt or click on the slides. Yes, that's in the bottom of this. You see that little turquoise teal button, that Fiveable green button, and download the slides with the prompt and the questions. I'll kind of address a little bit of the questions, and then you guys are going to do it as homework, but it's gonna be so fun because it doesn't impact your school grade at all. And you actually get some good feedback, timely feedback. So what is the question going to ask? It says, prompt A, identify one feature of the Indian Ocean basin that is reflected in the passage. So we're looking kind of here at like already existing systems of trade in the Indian Ocean, which is great if you're still on units 1 and 2, 1200 to 1450, because you're already studying about what the Indian Ocean trade was like before. So look at, if you're not in this unit already, that's fine. You can still answer prompt A, identifying one feature of the Indian Ocean basin that is reflected in the passage. So you need to kind of point out information specifically from the passage, but don't quote multiple sentences. Quote 1 or 2 words if you have to, but really you want to be looking at what information in the passage is connected to what I know about the Indian Ocean basin. So that's how you're going to address prompt A. In your responses, if you haven't done a short answer question before, in your responses, they can be short and sweet. Think like 1 to 4 sentences. I wouldn't do more than 5 sentences ever. It's just too wordy. Make sure you're just answering what the question is asking. So you're identifying one feature of the Indian Ocean basin reflected in the passage. So using information from the passage, connecting it to something about the Indian Ocean basin. B, identify and explain one change in the Indian Ocean basin that followed the entry of Europeans, such as the Portuguese, in the 16th century. So again, if you're still in unit 1 and 2, learning about Indian Ocean trade, you know what Indian Ocean trade was like then. What is it like now that Europeans like the Portuguese have arrived? So we're looking at changes. What was it previously? What is it now? What has changed between that? And then C, identify and explain one limitation of this document as a source for historians researching the Indian Ocean basin in the 16th century. When we look at short answer questions, they're kind of stacked in this way that A is pretty accessible. Most people can answer A and get points for A. B, it requires a little bit more historical knowledge, a little bit harder. And then C is really thinking like a historian. And again, you can probably answer A, B, and C without having studied units 3 and 4, without even getting into 1450 to 1750, kind of just with the information in this presentation if you're not there yet. So what C is really asking us is to analyze the document, analyzing the source. We can be looking at the author of the source. What limitations does that author have? What internal biases does the author have? Why is it limited by the audience? So you can be thinking about how the audience could be a limitation of the source or the time period of the source, or what the source is not including. What are they deliberately excluding? Or what are they including that isn't necessary? So looking at how we analyze sources is how you're going to answer part C. Identify and explain one limitation of this document as a source for historians. So another last point I'm going to make here is that A just says identify, but B and C say identify and explain. So you're going to want to make sure that in your responses, you're doing some explaining, that you're giving more information and more analysis in your answer, because it has that part that's asking for you to explain it. So you need to go a little bit more in depth. So that is going to be your kind of homework. But again, we're here at Fiveable to help you. We'll give you great feedback and take advantage of this free service from us. I'll go back and show you guys what that source looked like again if you need to take a little picture, a little screenshot of it. This is the source. So if you want to take a picture or screenshot it, now is the time to do it. And I'll go back to the question here in just another second so you can screenshot or take a picture of that as well. And again, here's the question if you want to take a picture or do a quick screenshot of it. And then you're going to answer this submitting a response on our Schoology account. And then in about a week, we'll go over the scoring with you. Amazing. All right, let's wrap it up. With this unit, if you're not here yet, this is kind of a preview to let you know where you're going and also the connection that you're having to units 1 and 2, 1200 to 1450. Remember to consistently think globally and don't just think about it from the European perspective, but also think about it from already existing networks of trade. And make sure that you're connecting it to Unit 3. This is kind of confusing how they set it up, because Unit 3 is the same time period. It's about land-based empires. I kind of glossed over like the Ottomans if you didn't learn Unit 3. So make sure you're knowing those land-based empires, how it connects to Unit 4, because this is all in the same time period. And then make sure, especially for this unit, so it's such a good one for these historical skills. With comparison, we can compare reactions to these new changes. We can compare the establishment of these maritime empires. Continuity and change, like we just saw with the short answer question, really getting at the continuity and change. Causation is one of the topics. Causes and effects. Make sure that you're looking at all of these skills and using those skills throughout the unit. That's all I have for you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining with me. And make sure you follow us on all of our social media channels at Think Fiveable. You can follow me on Twitter at Mrs. Thiessen. I've been doing a stream basically one a week. I won't be with us next week. I'm going to be in Greece. But make sure that you guys are participating in that free service that we have here by submitting a short answer response on Schoology. Take care, guys. Make sure you get a good night's sleep, do your homework, and we'll see you next time here at Think Fiveable. Bye.